Usually when we talk about getting a medical diagnosis, there's this very clear expectation of precision.
Right? Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Like, it's almost like engineering. I mean, if you break your arm and you go to the hospital, the doctor takes an x-ray, they slap it up on the light box, point to a jagged white line, and they just say, well, there it is. There's your problem.
Right. And it's incredibly comforting because, it's entirely binary. Like, the bone is broken or the bone is intact.
Yeah.
I think we're just deeply wired to want our problems to be visible like that.
Totally. But then, you step into the world of human personality. And specifically, we're looking at that really blurry line today where a normal personality becomes what the medical field actually calls disordered.
Yeah, the disordered label.
Right. And suddenly that crisp, clear x-ray machine is just completely useless. I mean, we are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, honestly, it's incredibly murky.
Oh, it might be the ultimate definition of diagnostic muddy waters. Like, when you move away from physical bones and into the actual architecture of who someone fundamentally is, well, the illusion of that clean medical certainty just shatters pretty quickly.
Exactly. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're taking you into the fascinating and, frankly, totally chaotic world of human personality. Because, I mean, we all have quirks, right?
For sure.
Like, you have your weird habits. I certainly have mine. Some of us are just, prone to intense moods or stubbornness or a deep need for control. But at what point does a quirk or a daily behavioral pattern cross an invisible line and actually become a clinical disorder?
And to figure that out, we are drawing today from a truly massive, heavily researched stack of excerpts from the Handbook of Personality Disorders, 2nd edition.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's a monumental text. It basically pulls back the curtain on this quiet, ongoing crisis within psychology and psychiatry over how we literally define human nature itself.
And our mission today is to kind of give you a shortcut through all that really dense academic literature so you can understand this massive debate. Like, we're going to look at the clash between strict medical labels, grand evolutionary theories that try to explain our existence, and, believe it or not, a system of complex math based entirely on counting words in the dictionary.
Which sounds crazy, but it's real.
It is. So, okay, let's unpack this. And I think the best place to start is with the medical labels because, well, that's the system most of us are familiar with today.
Right. So the turning point for modern psychiatry really hit in 1980. That was with the publication of the DSM-3, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
Right, the big book.
Exactly. And this book marked the triumph of what researchers call the Neo-Kraepelinian medical model, which I know is a heavy term.
Yeah, Neo-Kraepelinian is a mouthful.
It really is. But the core assumption of this model is actually very simple. It assumes that mental disorders are discrete, separate disease entities, just like physical illnesses.
So it's basically the broken bone model again. Like, the assumption is that a personality disorder is a specific thing you either catch or develop, and you just, you either have it or you don't.
Yes. And this model gained incredible traction in the 20th century, mainly because of early massive successes in general medicine. Like, for example, back in the early 1900s, there was this very common, devastating form of psychosis called general paresis.
Okay, yeah.
And people thought it was a purely psychological breakdown. But scientists eventually discovered it was actually caused by late-stage syphilis, like a very specific biological agent, a bacteria.
Wow, so a physical bug causing what looked like a mental breakdown.
Exactly. And when they figured that out, the expectation across the entire field just became, aha, every single mental disorder will eventually have a single big biological cause.
Which, I mean, it sounds amazing in theory. You find the bacteria, you cure the madness. But when you apply that to something as complex as a personality disorder, I mean, it feels like trying to fix a glitching smartphone app by, like, replacing the cracked glass on your screen.
That is a great way to put it.
Like, you're trying to solve a deep, complex software issue with this totally superficial hardware fix. It's just entirely the wrong level of analysis.
That analogy gets right to the heart of it, honestly, because the medical model works brilliantly for diseases that have two specific things. First, a single cause, what doctors call an etiology.
Right, like the syphilis bacteria.
Exactly. And second, symptoms that perfectly indicate one specific disease. The medical term is pathognomonic features. Just think of like a distinct bullseye rash that guarantees you have Lyme disease.
Got it. But personality disorders don't have a single underlying cause, and they definitely don't have a bullseye rash.
Far from it. I mean, they have wildly complex origins. You're talking about dozens of tiny genetic variations interacting with a massive web of psychosocial factors.
Like childhood trauma and stuff.
Exactly. Early childhood attachment, subtle traumas, peer dynamics, cultural influences. You cannot just swab someone's cheek or take a blood test and say, yep, the lab results are in, you've tested positive for borderline personality disorder.
Right. And because that medical model fundamentally does not fit the reality of how human personalities actually develop, the result has been this massive diagnostic mess in the modern DSM.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly messy.
Like, if you look at the text, the manual is plagued by what they call rampant comorbidity, which basically just means people constantly overlap into many different diagnoses at the exact same time. You don't fit neatly into one box.
No, people rarely do.
And because of this, for a really long time, the most common diagnosis given by professionals was actually personality disorder, not otherwise specified, or PDNOS.
Yeah, it essentially just became a catch-all category.
It's the psychiatric equivalent of a junk drawer in your kitchen. I mean, if the main output of your highly scientific classification system is just other, your system is fundamentally broken.
What's fascinating here is how this desperate pursuit of a strict medical model has actually degraded clinical care over the decades.
How so?
Well, by trying to force highly subjective, incredibly complex human behaviors into concrete checkbox symptoms, the field arrived at this impoverished, almost dehumanized understanding of psychopathology.
So they just focus on the checklist.
Right. Clinicians are taught to treat the criteria as if they are the disorder itself. They look at the checkbox instead of looking at the deeply complex human being sitting right in front of them.
So I guess, what does this all mean? Like, if this medical model we currently use in the DSM is so fundamentally flawed, and if it just creates these messy, overlapping jump drawer categories, how on earth did we end up using it in the first place?
It's a great question.
Because if we want to understand the trap we're currently in, we have to look back at the history of how doctors first started classifying these things. It wasn't always just a list of checkboxes, was it?
No, not at all. Actually, if you go back to the 19th century, the concepts were quite different. In the 1800s, psychiatrists like J.C. Pritchard were dealing with patients who clearly had severe destructive psychological issues.
But they weren't, like, hallucinating.
Right. They didn't have hallucinations or delusions. They weren't detached from reality. So Pritchard actually coined the term moral insanity to describe this. Insanity without delusions.
Wow, moral insanity. That's a strong phrase.
It is. And later, Emil Kraepelin, who is a giant in psychiatric history, theorized that these personality disorders were just milder, attenuated forms of major psychoses like schizophrenia.
Okay, but the real shift, the moment that arguably should have set the entire field on a much healthier path, came a bit later, right? Around 1923.
Yes. That was when Kurt Schneider published a truly pivotal book called Psychopathic Personalities. And Schneider did something incredibly profound for the time.
What did he do?
He clearly separated the idea of an abnormal personality from a disordered personality.
I really want to linger on this because I absolutely love this distinction. If you're listening right now and you've ever worried that your eccentricities mean there's something wrong with you, Schneider's definition is so refreshing. Break down how he defined abnormal.
Sure. So for Schneider, an abnormal personality simply meant you deviated from the statistical average of the population.
Like height.
Exactly. Think about physical height. Being extremely tall or extremely short is abnormal statistically, but it's not a disease. It's just an extreme manifestation of a completely normal human trait.
Right. So you can be an incredibly intense or eccentric or deeply introverted person, and that makes you abnormal, but not sick.
Correct. A personality only becomes disordered, or what he termed psychopathic, though the word meant something a bit different back then when one of two things happens. Either the person inherently suffers because of their personality, or they cause the community around them to suffer.
That is just so humanizing. It completely removes the medical stigma from just being different. It means you can be highly unusual, way outside the norm, without being sick.
And even more importantly, Schneider saw these personality types as ideal types that exist on a fluid continuum. He explicitly said they were not rigid, hermetically sealed boxes.
See, this is what blows my mind. If we had this fluid, highly nuanced, and arguably much more humane understanding of personality almost a century ago, why did we throw it away?
It's frustrating, I know.
Like, why did we devolve into the rigid, broken checkboxes of the modern DSM?
Well, the short answer is a crisis of legitimacy. By the 1970s, psychiatry was under massive public and professional attack for being unscientific, subjective, and unreliable.
Ah, so they panicked.
Basically.
Yeah.
The field was terrified of losing its status as a hard medical science. So the Neo-Kraepelinians pushed the discrete medical model aggressively to make psychiatry look exactly like physical medicine.
Because they needed to be taken seriously by, like, hospitals and insurance companies.
Exactly. You wanted something that could be reliably coded for insurance companies and treated like a traditional disease. So we basically traded Schneider's brilliant nuance for the illusion of scientific certainty.
Man, it is genuinely alarming to realize that historical concepts from the 1920s were more sophisticated than the medical models we rely on today.
It really is a step backward in some ways.
But if the official medical model is failing us, and history was just ignored in favor of insurance codes, what can modern empirical science tell us?
Well, the answer there is also pretty shocking because modern psychological science is currently dealing with its own massive crisis of truth.
Yes, you're pointing to the replication crisis. It is a staggering problem in the field right now.
Can you explain what that is for the listener?
Sure. So the Reproducibility Project recently took 100 studies published in 3 of the top psychology journals in the world. Hundreds of scientists collaborated with one simple goal.
Just to see if they work twice.
Exactly. Just repeat the original experiments and see if you get the same results.
I remember reading this in the sources. Out of 100 top-tier peer-reviewed studies, only 39 actually replicated.
Yeah, that is the harsh reality.
That means more than 60% of these bedrock studies completely failed when tested a second time. That's wild. And the news actually gets worse, because even among the 39 studies that did replicate, the effect sizes, like the actual real-world impact of what they were measuring, were basically cut in half compared to the original reports.
Yikes.
Yeah. It heavily reinforces a famous paper by the researcher John Ioannidis, which was bluntly titled, "Most Published Research Findings Are False."
So if the empirical data, like the actual experiments, are that deeply flawed and unreliable, what do researchers actually rely on when they try to make sense of something as complicated as a personality disorder?
Well, in the absence of reliable data, they rely heavily on paradigms. A paradigm is basically a grand theoretical framework.
Like a lens to view things through.
Exactly. Because individual studies can be so flimsy, scientists cling to these overarching theories that dictate how to view the world and what even counts as data in the first place.
Which brings us to Theodore Millon. Because if the medical model is just checking boxes, Millon actually wanted to know why the boxes exist.
Right. He created an evolutionary model of personality disorder.
Right. He essentially said, let's stop just making lists of symptoms and look at the fundamental struggles of human existence.
Yes. Millon looked to the process of evolution as the ultimate, undeniable anchor. He theorized that human personality is driven by 3 universal evolutionary tasks that literally every living organism faces.
Okay, let's walk through those 3 tasks because they map onto human behavior so beautifully. The first task is survival.
Right. Survival is the polarity of pleasure versus pain. As an organism, are you operating primarily to enhance your life, seeking pleasure and growth?
Or are you operating defensively, just trying to preserve your life and avoid pain or damage?
Exactly. Then the second task is adaptation. Once you figure out how to survive, how do you deal with the environment around you?
This is the polarity of active versus passive, right?
Yes. Do you actively manipulate and modify your environment to suit your needs, or do you passively accommodate, just accepting whatever the environment it gives you?
Okay, and the third task is reproduction. This is the polarity of self versus other.
Right. To avoid the heavy biological jargon, just think of it in terms of survival strategies in nature.
Like animals.
Yeah. Some creatures focus entirely on themselves. They spread their seeds widely without sticking around to care for the offspring.
Okay, the egotistic strategy.
Exactly. While other creatures have very few offspring but focus entirely on nurturing and affiliating with them, Millon applied that polarity to humans.
So are you egotistically focused on the self, or are you affiliatively focused on nurturing others?
Exactly.
So Millon takes these 3 basic evolutionary spectrums, survival, adaptation, and reproduction, and he uses them to explain the deep architecture of every single personality disorder.
He does, and it's quite elegant.
It really is. Let's look at narcissistic personality disorder as an example, because I found this fascinating. How does Millon's evolutionary model explain the narcissist?
Well, Millon classifies the classic narcissist as passive and self-oriented. They are passively confident that the world will cater to them because they are so profoundly focused on the self.
Wow, so they don't even try, they just expect it.
Exactly. If you look at their internal thought process, they are cognitively expansive. They have this admirable, grandiose self-image that is completely untethered from objective reality. They don't have to actively do anything to feel superior. They just inherently believe they are.
And if you look at their physical energy and mood, the text describes them as having an insouciant mood. They are unimpressionable, buoyant, coolly nonchalant.
Yeah, very detached.
They just float above the rest of us until that confidence is shaken by an insult, and then you get that famous, explosive, narcissistic rage. It's an incredibly compelling, detailed profile.
It really paints a vivid picture.
It does, but I have to push back here for a second, because as beautiful as this sounds, isn't a grand theory like this just kind of an elegant fantasy?
How do you mean?
Well, if I'm a really clever theorist, can't I just take any evolutionary concept like survival or reproduction and just twist the narrative to perfectly match whatever behavior I happen to be looking at today?
I see what you're saying.
Like, it feels like we are retrofitting a story to match the DSM rather than proving anything objectively.
That is the exact danger of top-down grand theories. They can very easily devolve into subjective storytelling.
Right.
When you adopt a paradigm like Millon's, you start seeing your theory everywhere. It becomes practically impossible to prove wrong because any human behavior can be rationalized to fit an evolutionary narrative if you are creative enough.
So if the medical model gives us broken, unreliable checkboxes and grand evolutionary theories risk becoming just unfalsifiable storytelling, how do we actually escape human bias?
Well, some researchers decided to build a model entirely from the bottom up. No theories, no clinical assumptions, no doctors sitting in a room arguing.
Just math, right?
Exactly, just cold, hard math in the dictionary. This is known as the inductive approach, and it is driven by something called the lexical hypothesis.
Okay, tell us about the lexical hypothesis.
It was championed way back in 1884 by a man named Sir Francis Galton. Galton's premise was incredibly simple, but profoundly elegant. He essentially said, if a human trait is genuinely important to our daily lives, society will have eventually invented a single word for it.
If it matters, we name it.
Precisely that. Galton originally estimated there were about 1,000 words in the English language for character traits. Later, more rigorous researchers literally scoured the entire unabridged dictionary and found roughly 18,000 words describing human personality.
That is a lot of words. But you obviously can't build a useful diagnostic manual with 18,000 different variables, so they had to shrink that dictionary down, and they used math to do it.
Right. They used a complex mathematical tool called factor analysis. The way it works is you give thousands of ordinary people massive questionnaires asking them to rate themselves on these words.
Okay.
Then, you let a computer run the math to see which words naturally group together.
It's like finding redundancies, right? Like, if someone rates themselves very high on the word talkative, the math notices they probably also rate themselves high on outgoing, loud, and gregarious.
Exactly. The computer clusters these overlapping words together into a single, broader dimension. And when you boil down the entire English language using this mathematical clustering, you end up with the famous five-factor model, the Big Five.
Ah, the Big Five.
Yes. You might know them by the acronym OCEAN: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. By just giving people lists of adjectives and letting a computer run the factor analysis, proponents of the Big Five claim they have discovered the universal, completely objective dimensions of human nature.
That's the claim, yeah.
Like, they bypassed all the biases of clinical psychiatrists. No one had to debate what a symptom was. The math just revealed the underlying structure of language.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this inductive, math-based method is attempting to completely replace the rigid DSM category.
Which is huge.
It is. Instead of saying you have a disorder or you don't, the five-factor model says every single person listening to this exists somewhere on these fluid, unbroken dimensions.
So a personality disorder under this model is just an extreme expression on one or more of these totally normal traits.
Exactly. It brings us right back to Kurt Schneider's continuum. There is no sharp line between normal and pathological.
It sounds perfect. You count words, you run the factor analysis, you bypass human ego. I mean, it sounds like the ultimate unbiased scientific truth.
It does sound that way.
But is complex math actually immune to human error? It turns out this objective statistical model has some massive glaring blind spots.
Very true. The fatal flaw in these inductive models is known in statistics as the stopping rule problem.
The stopping rule problem, what is that?
Well, factor analysis doesn't magically ring a bell and tell you how many dimensions of personality there actually are. The math just keeps spitting out smaller and smaller. more specific clusters of words forever.
Oh, it just keeps crunching numbers.
Exactly. There are no truly objective mathematical rules for when to stop counting the clusters. So why are there exactly 5 factors in the Big Five?
Because it's essentially a historical accident. The early researchers just decided to stop at 5 because it looked clean, which is a wild thing to realize about the most famous personality test in the world.
It really is. And to prove how arbitrary it is, look at the Hexacoco model.
Right.
Other groups of researchers ran the exact same kind of lexical, dictionary-based studies across multiple different cultures and languages, and they consistently found 6 main factors, not 5. They realized the original model was missing a massive 6th dimension, which they called honesty-humility.
And this is not just some minor statistical footnote for academics to argue about. If you don't include that 6th factor of honesty-humility, you completely miss what psychology calls the dark triad of personality traits.
Psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism.
Exactly. The 5-factor model simply doesn't capture them properly. How can you possibly claim to have a universal mathematical map of human personality that accidentally leaves out psychopaths?
You really can't. It highlights that the math is only ever as good as the parameters the humans set for it. But the issue gets even deeper and, frankly, a bit more disturbing when you look at how cognitive complexity affects the math.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought this up. When I was reading through the sources, the construct repertory test study, the CRT study, it completely blew my mind. I actually had to read it twice to make sure I understood what it was implying.
It's a heavy concept.
It really is. Could you break down how this study worked?
Absolutely. So the CRT is a test used to measure how cognitively complex a person's worldview is. In simple terms, it measures how nuanced a person is in their ability to perceive differences in others.
Like, do they see people in very simple stereotypes, or do they see highly detailed, contradictory traits in people?
Precisely. So researchers took a group of people, measured their cognitive complexity with the CRT, and then had them take those massive personality word tests.
And what did the math reveal when they ran the factor analysis?
Well, when you isolate the data from people with very low cognitive complexity, people who see the world in very simple black and white terms, the math naturally clumps their answers together and yields just 3 personality factors.
Okay.
But when you take the data from highly complex, nuanced people taking the exact same test, the math yields 7 personality factors.
Wait, I want to make sure I'm grasping the magnitude of this. Are you telling me that if the test takers themselves have a simple vocabulary and a simple worldview, the mathematical model of human nature literally has fewer dimensions?
That is exactly what the data shows. Yeah.
That's crazy! How can we possibly call this a universal objective map of the human mind if the shape of the map physically changes based on the vocabulary of the person holding the pen?
We can't. It completely proves that this objective math is highly dependent on the cognitive capacity of the people providing the data in the first place. Wow. Which brings us to a brilliant analogy from the source material regarding the ultimate limitation of factor analysis. It's called the red car problem.
Okay, lay out the red car for us.
Imagine you're driving down the highway and your car breaks down. The engine is making a terrifying grinding noise. Smoke is pouring out. You manage to tow it to a massive, highly analytical mechanic shop.
Sounds expensive.
Right. And when you arrive, the head mechanic takes one look at your vehicle and says, you have a red car. Please get in the red car line to receive the red treatment.
What?
You try to argue. You say, but the problem is in the engine. It's making a grinding noise. And the mechanic replies, we don't look under the hood here. We've statistically analyzed millions of cars all over the world, and we found they primarily cluster into 3 categories: red, blue, and yellow. So we treat the color.
That is such a devastating critique of factor analysis. I mean, it just groups surface words together. It takes all the red words, like angry, loud, frustrated, puts them in a bucket, and calls it a personality dimension. But it completely refuses to open the hood to see the latent engine issue.
Right. It ignores the actual psychological mechanism that is causing the person to suffer in the first place.
Wow.
It identifies clusters of superficial similarities, but it completely fails to explain the cause of the disorder. It's basically describing the paint job while the engine is on fire.
Okay, let's bring this all together because we've covered incredible ground today. We started with the rigid medical model of the DSM, which tries to force complex human behavior into discrete disease boxes, but ultimately fails because personality doesn't have a single, simple biological cause like a bacteria.
Right, and from there, we looked at grand evolutionary theories like Theodore Millon's, Those try to beautifully explain the why behind our behaviors, using tasks like survival and adaptation, but they carry the heavy risk of becoming subjective, unfalsifiable storytelling.
And finally, we explored the dictionary math of factor analysis and the Big Five. It promises total objectivity by counting words, but it ends up just sorting surface symptoms, like grouping the red cars together without ever looking under the hood at the real engine of our minds.
Exactly.
So if you are listening right now, what is the ultimate takeaway from this deep dive? I think it's that defining human personality is profoundly, beautifully difficult.
Oh, absolutely.
You should never feel entirely bound by neat, rigid labels, whether it's a doctor's diagnosis, an internet personality test, or a Big Five spreadsheet. Human nature is simply far too wonderfully complex to be reduced to a single checkbox.
And this raises an important question for the future of psychology and really for all of us. How do we balance the undeniable scientific need for classification and research with the unique, irreplaceable narrative of the individual person?
And that leads me to a final thought I want to leave you with, just something to mull over as you go about your day. We've seen that our best objective models for personality are heavily limited by human language, the dictionary, and by our own cognitive complexity.
Right.
But what happens when advanced AI begins to truly analyze human behavioral data? Like, will a machine, unburdened by the limits of the English language and our 3 to 7 factor human brains, look at our data and discover completely alien dimensions of our personalities?
Oh, wow.
Might AI map out deep structural traits of human nature that we literally do not have the words to describe?
Now that is a fascinating, slightly terrifying frontier.
We will definitely have to see. But until then, remember that the X-ray machine for the human soul is still broken, and those murky, unclassifiable waters are exactly where the real beauty of being human actually lies. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.